What you're about to see is one of history's greatest tactical upsets. Before we dive in, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next battle breakdown, drop a like, and let me know in the comments which battle I should cover next. 6,000 exhausted Englishmen were about to destroy an army 4 times their size. Here's exactly how it happened. It was October 1415. King Henry V's army was in ruins. Disease had torn through his ranks after the long, grueling siege of Harfleur. Dysentery spread through the camps, killing men faster than any French sword could. What remained was a tired, hungry, half-broken force of 6,000 to 9,000 men, the vast majority of them archers, rather than heavily armored knights. They weren't marching toward glory anymore. They were marching toward survival, desperately trying to reach the safety of the English-held port of Calais before winter closed in. Standing in their way was a French army of 20,000 to 30,000 men, knights and men-at-arms in gleaming plate armor, fresh, well-fed, and utterly confident. To the French nobility, this wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be a formality, a chance to capture or kill the English king and end the campaign in a single afternoon. Many French lords had reportedly gambled among themselves over which of them would capture Henry first. But Henry made a decision that would change the outcome of the entire war. Instead of trying to outmaneuver a force nearly 4 times his size, he chose the ground himself. He positioned his army in a narrow field near the village of Agincourt, squeezed tightly between 2 dense forests, Tramecourt on one side and Agincourt itself on the other. This single choice would strip the French of their greatest advantage, their numbers. With thick woodland pressing in on both flanks, there was no space to spread out, no room to encircle, no way to use their overwhelming size to surround the smaller English force. The French would be forced into a straight, narrow, brutal collision, funneled exactly where Henry wanted them. Then, nature itself turned against France. Heavy rain had fallen through the entire night before the battle, soaking the freshly plowed farmland into a thick, clinging swamp. By morning, the battlefield had become a nightmare underfoot. French knights, weighed down by 60 to 80 pounds of solid plate armor, began sinking into the mud with every single step they took. Their horses fared no better, struggling and stumbling under the combined weight of armor, rider, and saddle. The famous French heavy cavalry charge, the same weapon that had shattered enemy lines across Europe for generations, was about to be reduced to a slow, exhausting, and ultimately suicidal struggle through thick, sucking mud. Henry's archers, meanwhile, had spent the hours before dawn preparing a defense that would prove devastating. Each man drove a long, sharpened wooden stake into the ground in front of his position, angling it outward toward the enemy at chest height for a charging horse. Row after row of these stakes formed a jagged, deadly barrier that no cavalry charge could survive hitting at full speed. It was cheap, it was simple, and it would prove absolutely lethal. When the French cavalry finally launched their charge, thundering across the muddy field toward the English line, chaos erupted almost immediately. Horses that reached the stakes were impaled outright or reared back in terror, throwing their armored riders violently into the mud below. Others, trying to avoid the stakes entirely, veered into each other, creating a tangled, panicked mess of horses and men in the middle of what was supposed to be a devastating charge. The mud swallowed fallen knights whole, many unable to even stand back up under the sheer weight of their own armor. And then the arrows came. 5,000 English longbowmen, standing behind their protective wall of stakes, drew back their massive warbows, and released again and again in coordinated, relentless waves. Each longbow could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute, meaning the sky above the battlefield turned dark with tens of thousands of arrows falling every few seconds. This storm of arrows tore into the advancing French ranks long before they ever reached the English line, breaking formation, breaking momentum, and breaking morale all at once. Men fell wounded or dying, their own armor now working against them, trapping them in the mud where more arrows continued to rain down. The narrow battlefield that Henry had so carefully chosen now became a trap of the French army's own making. As the second and third waves of French soldiers pushed forward to support the failing charge, they packed together so tightly in that narrow corridor between the trees that men could barely lift their weapons, let alone maneuver. Those who slipped, fell, or were struck down were simply crushed beneath the weight of their own advancing comrades pressing forward from behind. In the chaos and crush, countless French soldiers suffocated or were trampled to death without a single Englishman ever laying a hand on them. By the time the surviving French men-at-arms finally reached the English line, they were utterly exhausted, wounded, and sunk in mud up to their knees, barely able to lift their swords after the brutal struggle just to arrive there. The English archers, by contrast, were lightly equipped, unarmored, and still full of energy after the physical toll the mud and stakes had taken almost entirely on the French side. Casting aside their bows, the archers rushed forward with knives, hatchets, and heavy mallets, finishing off exhausted knights who could barely stand, let alone defend themselves. When the battle finally ended, the scale of the French disaster became clear. Somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 French soldiers lay dead, including a staggering portion of the French nobility, entire bloodlines wiped out in a single afternoon. English losses, by comparison, were remarkably small, likely only a few hundred men. It wasn't luck that decided Agincourt. It was terrain chosen with precision, weather exploited without mercy, and superior tactics executed to devastating effect, turning what should have been a certain French victory into one of the most decisive and studied defeats in military history. If this breakdown helped you understand why Agincourt is still talked about 600 years later, subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest battles, and let me know in the comments what battle we should analyze next.